The best superhero movie to take place at Christmas since Batman Returns. And yes, Matt and Ben, that is a shot at Iron Man 3. Tonight we review Shazam.
I read this study on superpowers, and in 6 out of 10, belief is the key.
I believe I can fly! I believe I can fly! Superman! Superman, what arm is it?
Your phone's charged.
What the hell? Oh, snap! You're welcome for not getting robbed!
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of game, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at HeroPantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. This is yet another movie, Shazam, that we reviewed and talked about last year, and I think we both really enjoyed this movie. And it's hard to have fresh thoughts after a year or so, but the one thing I will say is I think on rewatch, I think I enjoyed this a little bit more. I don't know why that is. Perhaps it is the circumstances under which we are watching these movies, but I think that this movie really holds up, and I was just even more impressed with the performances of both Asher Angel as Billy Batson and Zachary Levi as Shazam. I think those performances still truly stand out to me, and I really do like some of the designs and the setting. This movie just works, Brian. That's all I can say about it.
I think what helps is not really knowing the history of the Shazam character too much. Like, if you're kind of casual and just heard the name Shazam and not really knowing the origin of the character, this does a really good job of doing some twists and turns for you, because me going in the first time had no clue about the whole, Shazam family thing going on, and I didn't really pick up on it. But then when you watch it the second time around and knowing the whole Shazam family, it's obvious that they were setting it up from the beginning. But because of, you're not really paying attention and you're just a casual fan, you can kind of see past that and kind of enjoy the movie. So that kind of helps a little bit, not knowing the origin story a little bit. At least for me it did. And then the second time around, you can figure it out and see all the math and add everything up and see how even the kids are wearing the colors of those respective uniforms at the end. So I thought that was a nice little touch, especially watching the second time around. For me, it holds up about the same. I still have my slight criticisms about... again, the origin story of the villain is so cliche and overdone. And then the third act kind of keeps going and going when I kind of felt like they should have shortened the final battle at the end. But other than that, and then some inconsistencies between Asher and Zach Levy, just like it feels like Zachary Levy was acting a little different than he was as he would be as a kid, but I don't know if that's just a little inconsistent, but it just kind of felt like it was 2 different people, not the same person. But that was only sometimes, But that's a slight criticism. But overall, a fun movie, definitely a family movie that everyone can enjoy, and it kind of transcends that a little bit and has a lot of good humor, especially with Freddy. That kid's amazing. And then, of course, the whole big nod in the middle of the movie. That Poppy Big, obviously, wink, wink, because when I talked to you probably 4 months before this movie came out and I saw the trailer, I was like, oh, good, they're doing big with superheroes. That's like the right tone for this movie, because that's exactly what Billy Batson is. And they just took that formula, tweaked it a little bit, and made it a lot of fun.
To me, Brian, I think how this movie comes across to me, especially on rewatch, is those movies in the 1980s that were either PG or PG-13, but there would be a couple things in the movie that you would just look at, especially hindsight being what it is, and you'd be like, is that really appropriate for a child to see? I definitely got that vibe. There were a couple moments in this movie, even some of the language that was used, that it felt like it was just a little bit more mature than what was going for. So I think it kind of added to the throwback feeling of this movie. I don't know. Did you get that impression as well?
Yeah, especially with the Big stuff. I mean, Big is like that exact kind of level. I mean, it's a family movie, but then it has that questionable, like, oh my God, is he gonna have sex with that older woman even though he's 14 or whatever, and then they end up sharing the bunk bed. But yeah, I mean, it's got that feel to it for sure, and I think that's the kind of feel they wanted, and it's a nice throwback kind of feel. And then, of course, I think what you're kind of alluding to is maybe the murder scenes and or the strip club scene, because that's totally something out of like an '80s movie where the kids are like, and then the audience is like, oh no, and then it's one of those moments that you go back as you're older and watch and be like, ah, that's for us as an adult.
All right, let's get to some of the notes. Originally, this was supposed to be a movie that had both Shazam and Black Adam. The Black Adam movie, we don't know if we're ever going to see it. It is supposedly going to star Dwayne The Rock Johnson. We don't know if that's going to happen. It's always one of those things that is perpetually in development and is not actually being filmed. Originally, Dwayne Johnson wanted Arnie Hammer to play Shazam, and all I could say is that would be a very different and much more intense version of the character, and I don't think his acting style would jive with the rest of this movie.
Yeah, I'm not too big of an Army Hammer fan. I remember got Lone Ranger, and that just really was just like, wow, this they really put this guy in a starring role and expected him to draw money. But maybe that's just my singular opinion. I don't know how you feel about Army Hammer, but I'm not too big of a fan.
I think he's very good. I really like Arnie Hammer. Basically, if he's in smaller movies, I like him. And of course, Lone Ranger is not good. But I think if you watch Call Me by Your Name, if you watch Sorry to Bother You, The Social Network, I think he's very, very good in those movies.
Okay, well, I've kind of missed those movies. Even Social Network, yes, because I'm anti-Facebook. But I get what you're saying. I know that, I mean, I've seen a few clips of Man from Uncle on HBO from time to time, and that is pretty good, so I'll give him that. But I just feel like if he was Shazam, I don't think he would have drawn as much.
Perhaps, perhaps not. I mean, I think that this movie kind of drew because it's DC and because of the wackiness that is ensuing and kind of this new tone that they are going with. And I mean, I just think superhero movies are such an enormous draw at this point that unless you're completely crapping the bed, like the two movies we're talking about next week, that you are generally in good shape. When in going through this movie and talking about some of the nostalgia, Shazam and Dr. Savannah run across a giant keyboard at one point, and of course this is a direct reference to the 1988 movie Big, which, like this film, features a boy turned into adult overnight. In that film, Tom Hanks, COVID-19 survivor now, and Robert Loggia play two songs on a similar keyboard, and I definitely marked out at that specific moment, and that was pretty great.
Yeah, because like I said, when I saw that trailer, I immediately said Big, and I know that's probably what they were going for, but to actually do that reference in the movie made me smile because someone like me who loves all the inside baseball stuff immediately got what was going on.
So, John Glover, who is Savannah's father, he has a history in the DC Universe. I think we talked about this last year when we originally reviewed Shazam, but just to review, he was the voice of the Riddler in Batman the Animated Series. He was just Dr. Jason Woodrow in Batman and Robin, and of course, he was Lionel Luthor in Smallville. So, John Glover is somebody who has a lot of history and is very much a character actor, especially within this universe. Another villain, of course, being Mark Strong. He is the lead. He was enthusiastic about playing Savannah, describing him as an evil bastard, and stating those roles are always fun to play. Mark Strong has played a villain in a number of movies, and it's kind of become, I think that's one of the problems, that he's done it so many times that maybe it's lost its effectiveness.
Yes, the case of being typecast, Christoph Waltz kind of fell victim to that a few years after Inglourious Bastards. I get what you're saying, man, and I feel like he's the perfect guy now, and especially at his age. He's already bald. He's got that voice to play Professor X in the new X-Men interpretations coming up. I think he'd be perfect for that. I think it'll be a switch from this whole, typecasting of the evil bastard. He was the villain in Kick-Ass, which we'll probably tackle in Volume 3 of Superhero Pantheon. And then, of course, Green Lantern, which we totally put in the pile of shame on this podcast. So he's been all over. And he's still really good as a good guy. Like, he's a really great character. I forget his name in the Kingsman movies, but especially in the second one, I thought he did a great job in that one, being that mentor role. So he can definitely pull off, I think, a Professor X type and kind of get away from this. But still, I mean, he's good at playing an evil bastard, like he says. In terms of John Glover, man, he's such a great character actor. I think people don't realize how funny he is. Because in Gremlins 2, he's hilarious. Even to this day, when I watch Gremlins 2, I'm laughing at him and the interaction and him trying to defeat that gremlin on the top of in his top office at the top of the building. That shit's hilarious and disgusting and gross, and he's great in it. So, shout out to Gremlins 2.
Absolutely. And of course, we talked about Digimon Hansu last year. We're going to talk about him again. There's going to be another burning question about him. He has appeared in 5 comic book movies, Brian, if you can believe it. 2 within the context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and 2 in the DC Extended Universe. He has played 3 different characters in the MCU. He was Korath in both Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain Marvel. And in DC, he appeared as Fisherman King in Aquaman, and that he was the wizard Shazam in Shazam. He's like the Stan Lee. He's like a mini Stan Lee, just making cameos, appearing in small roles in all of these movies. And the wildest thing to me is that he was in Aquaman that came out in December of 2018, and then Captain Marvel, which came out just 4 months later, and then he was in Shazam, which came out a month after that.
Yeah, he's playing both sides. But that's fine now, because it's not like it was 5 years ago when there was this kind of like subtle, I don't want to say war, but it's like you can't work both kind of thing. And then, of course, James Gunn kind of broke that. Or maybe, Diamond Hunsu actually broke it first, I think, technically, then, if you're filming Captain Marvel in 2017, I guess. So yeah, I mean, he's able to play both sides, and that's very good for his career. He's making all that extra money, and why not? He's got that kind of presence to be that kind of side character and kind of give it some pathos or whatever you want to call it. But his side characters are usually really good. And even here in Shazam, even though it was a little hokey for me and like the whole wizard stuff, but his voice sells it, and his voice is the kind of voice that kind of give some really crappy dialogue the drama and effectiveness it needs. So I mean, that stuff he was saying about wizards and being a champion and stuff, if you just read it out loud, it sounds ridiculous, but him saying it makes it sound like a wizard. So I get why they casted him, and I can't believe that he was an Aquaman in this, but I guess they just like his work so much they want to put him in as much stuff as they can, and I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a running theme where it's like we have him in all these different DC movies now in different roles. Hell, he can play Martian Manhunter for all we know.
I'm not sure. I really want to say something about a movie, but I'm not going to. I'll save that for off air. So let's talk about Asher Angel, who plays Billy Batson. The thing that I really noticed this time is the relationship between Billy Batson and Freddie Freeman, and I think that is such an important relationship, and it has to work really well. If those two don't have any chemistry, then the movie is going to falter. The thing that is even more impressive to me is that Freddie is able to have a similar chemistry with Billy Batson as he is Shazam, and it feels the same. It feels like Freddie is interacting and engaging with the same person, even though it's two different people. And I think that to me is the most impressive aspect of this movie. This is a movie about relationships, and when superhero movies are clicking at their best, I think that's why these movies work. Even if you don't necessarily have a superhero team, if you have a performer, if you have a hero who can interact with people and have fun and engage with them, I think that works out so much better. I think the reason that so many of these superhero movies falter is because they're not engaging with anyone, and it's about the goofy action sequences and stuff like that. And I think, or the plot mechanics. I think a lot of those Marvel movies, the reason they don't work is because they're so much about the solo heroes. And in this case, even though Shazam is solo for the most part, he has a lot of interaction with Freddy and a lot with the rest of the family. And especially on rewatching, that is definitely one of the things that I noticed.
Yeah, so I noticed this too, especially the second time around. We all know every good, hero archetype has that, mentor figure, right, to teach him the ropes about how to be a superhero and whatnot. They kind of flip it on its ear this time because they're using Freddy as that role. So it's very unique to have like a kid be the mentor role to an older kid who is playing an adult who's playing a superhero they've never been before, and he's teaching him the ropes. So that was the interesting thing that made that relationship really interesting in the second act when they're building that relationship, getting that trust, and then even the kids at the end make fun of them that they're bickering like an old couple. I thought that was a nice little touch. Whenever you have a friend like that, that's a true relationship. You know what I mean? Whenever you have that kind of argument where you sound like a bitter old couple, but hey, man, those are the true best friends, I think, and they showed that by the end of the movie they even called themselves best friends, and I think that's very significant too, considering that the whole point of Billy Batson is that he has no relationships in his life and that he's searching for his mom. So he finally accepts this friend in his life that he's probably never had a best friend in his life before, up until, or maybe even before he was even kidnapped, or not kidnapped, but got lost in that fair. But yeah, it's a really good story about adoption and acceptance and family and creating your own family and making your own family and that kind of thing. That's a great message too, and I love the diversity of it and the family and the way it's put together. I thought that was a great little subtle message, and I think that's why it makes it such a great family viewing.
And I think something else that you mentioned, you brought adoption. I don't think we've ever had a movie like this that speaks so positively and kind of reinforces the benefits of the step family or the found family. I think a lot of times when we see step parents, one of them or both of them is evil, or it's kind of done as a horror movie with this evil step parent. I mean, think about one of the most iconic stories ever told, Cinderella. That's exactly what one of the issues is that Cinderella has an evil stepmom. But in this case, the parents are genuinely good people who are trying to do the best by their family. And even the kids, I can make an argument that Darla is a little bit on the precocious side, but that these kids want to accept Billy into their family. And the thing that I like so much about it is that the kids want to accept Billy, and Billy is the one that doesn't want to accept the family. And I think that makes for an interesting dynamic as well, because that Billy is ultimately the one that has to discover things on his own and be open to the openness of this family. And that's also something that I really liked as well, because there's that moment after he sees his mom and just the dejection that you see in his face, and then he immediately makes that choice to go save his found family. And I think that is such a powerful moment and a powerful decision that I think really works out. And again, I think Asher Angel and Zachary Levi, this is not an easy thing to do, because they are both playing the same character in some ways. And Zachary Levi obviously has to do a lot of the physical performance, and Asher Angel kind of has to handle the emotional parts. But it has to feel cohesive, and the fact that it does, and the fact that it adds up and pays off so well, where you ultimately get the entire family fighting the demons at the end. And we could talk about the quality of the demons when we get to the villains, but for me, I just think it all really, really pays off.
I agree, and I like the little detail that his foster parents were also foster kids, so they understand that. So there's a good solid, foundation there, and it really connects to millions of people that are affected by that. And I think that's one of the things that not many of these superhero movies kind of do, is like that whole adopted family thing, and they kind of emphasize it to a degree here, and that's really cool to see that. Yeah, I think overall I enjoyed the family aspect. Some of the kids were annoying, and I'm not gonna lie, but you get past that. And I just couldn't believe that they casted Megan Good in that role, and she was acting like a kid, and I was just tripping out because, I mean, I had a thing for Megan Good, so that was really weird. But overall, I think what's his name, Adam Brody as older Freddy. I think that was an incredible moment, because I was like, God, that's like super, like 100% spot on, like 100% spot on. It's almost as if like they should have put him, Adam Brody, in It Chapter 2, but they also picked a good actor for him there. But still, like, that was an amazing casting choice, like 100% spot on. That had me like jaw drop, because I was like, God damn, that is an older Adam Brody. He was acting exactly like Freddy. It was ridiculous. So props to Adam Brody.
Absolutely. And I think if I had given the score, I think I would have gone a little bit low, but I'm giving this an 8. I feel really good about just about every aspect of this. I am certainly going to have my issues in the next two categories, but from a hero perspective, the reason that this movie works is because almost everybody on the hero side is giving either a good performance or a great performance, and I love the cohesiveness of everything on the hero side. So that's why I'm giving this a Pantheon level score of 8.
I'm gonna go with 7. I wasn't totally like blown away by the performances, but I thought they were really good. I figured the second time around I'd be kind of more emotionally connected and more invested in especially in Billy Batson's character journey. But I don't know, for some reason he kind of came off like a dick in the middle of the movie, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. So it happens when when you get these powers, and they even talk about it, just a little corruption in your soul a little bit from the powers. So it is what it is. But I'll go with a 7. I think. I mean, they are planning a sequel, but I think if they build on this role, it could be one of those great kind of Captain America roles. But by where like each movie, you get more and more connected with the character to the point where he's like one of your favorites of the team, basically. If he's going to the Justice League, that is.
Well, there is this very powerful moment that I don't really think needs to fit anywhere in our categories, but since you brought this up, there's this really interesting moment when there is this little kid who has Batman and Superman action figures fighting with each other. And there's this moment when he drops the action figures as soon as he sees Shazam. And at first, first time around, I really didn't notice that moment. It just kind of washed over me because it was just like, oh, he sees a real superhero. But I'm wondering if there's a little bit more symbolism there than was intended, because I think what you're starting to see is maybe the DCEU moving away from Batman and Superman and towards the Shazams and towards the Wonder Womans. And I do understand that we are getting a Batman movie next year, but it's not really going to be a part of this universe. And I wonder if kind of establishing these characters, just like Marvel, I think the reason that Marvel is so successful is that they did not start out with their A-team. They started out with Iron Man and Captain America, who at this point are very popular characters, but in 2008, 2009, they were B-level characters. And now they have risen to the A-list. And it is in DC's best interest to do the same thing. Yes, Batman's going to be there, and I'm sure his movie is going to make $1 bajillion. But when you establish Shazam and it makes the money it did, and Aquaman is able to make $1 billion, and Wonder Woman 2 is perhaps the most anticipated superhero movie of 2020, even with 2 Marvel movies coming out. I mean, that to me it really stuck out this time, that particular moment.
Yeah, I picked up on that too because it feels like they're making Shazam the new big flying muscular superhero of the group, or Justice League, or whatever you want to call it, whatever group of superheroes that they're putting together again. But I mean, for now, yeah, build up the other ones. That way you get this fan base like I'm talking about. Because like I said, Captain America 1 set the tone, but then by the time Avengers and especially Winter Soldier came out, there were fucking Captain America shirts all over the place after that. You know what I mean? So I think there's potential there because I know like the people that also saw it, Shazam, especially in theaters, they were very enthusiastic about how this kind of like, kind of helps the DCU a lot, and it was just good, if not better. Some people enjoyed it more than Aquaman, so I get that totally. And that scene kind of symbolizes that. And yeah, I mean, a crossover movie with Shazam and Wonder Woman, sign me up.
Yeah, I think that's something that could ultimately work. Even if they don't do a full team, I think even doing crossovers, I think that would work out just as well. Because I think the idea is that you just want 2 or more of these heroes. I think that's what works best. I think a movie like Thor Ragnarok proved that just having Thor and Hulk together works out just as well as having the entire Avengers, ultimately. So let's talk about the villains. There's really not a lot to say about the villains. They attempt to develop Dr. Sivana at the beginning. They do it a little bit throughout. I know that there's one scene that you really like that reminds you of Dogma. But let's face it, Mark Strong is kind of the person you want in this role, but there's just not a whole lot to it. The bullies there's a group of bullies, because this is kind of throwing back to the 1980s. They're a group of bullies. They're pretty generic. The demons are they're our gateway to getting the adopted family to fight together. So I guess they serve that purpose. The one thing I will say from a visual perspective, the demons do look very good. They look much better than a lot of CGI Marvel creations, and in some ways I think the demons actually hold up better. Part of that probably is the fact that a lot of this movie is at night versus the day, so you don't see the seams, so to speak. So I like the look of the demons, but they ultimately don't serve a lot of purpose beyond just being the 7 deadly sins. I'm giving the villains a 4.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 5. Pretty much the same reasons, but like the beginning really made you dislike Dr. Savani, even as a kid, it's like, God, that kid really caused that accident. That was not the fault of the old wizard or the magic or anything. He was like really doing something you're not supposed to do in the middle of a highway where you're trying to get out of the fucking moving vehicle and opening the door, and then all of a sudden your parents have to like tell you to stop and then cause a distraction. He caused the accident. I'm not like letting him go with this. Like, he caused that accident. He's an asshole. He deserved it. And his dad blaming him, I totally understand, because that kid totally endangered their lives that night, very selfishly. So that's my take on that. But yeah, he's a great performance. But like, again, it's just typecast. We've seen it before. The eye thing does help, and of course that scene we're in the middle of the movie, he kills the whole board and his father with the demons. I thought the demons were more like a I don't know. They felt like they were the demons from Ghostbusters one. I don't know how you like that kind of feel and look to them. That's kind of how I felt. So I thought that was a little, again, 80s nod right there. So maybe it was just subconscious or me just kind of putting too much into it, but it did feel like they were like, because especially with the statues breaking open, that was like straight out of Ghostbusters 1. So I thought that was a good little touch. But again, that's more akin to the tech score. Um, just not a fan of the origin story for the villain and the way that he carried himself. And then by the end of the movie, they were kind of making fun of him anyway. When that, they were making fun of the villain monologue at the end of every movie or whatever. And then Shazam can't even hear him because realistically they're so far away. They finally emphasized that two people floating in the air, 50 feet apart, they can't hear each other because of the sound. So that was a nice little touch as well. But again, very cliche. Could have done more. Probably could have trimmed a lot out of the origin story at the beginning too. So, a 5 for me.
Yeah, I think from a story perspective, that's actually a really good transition because it feels like it takes a while for this movie to get going, and there are certain occasions when I think it's okay to not see the hero for a while. I think Batman Begins is probably the best example of that, the way they just build up to Batman. But in this movie, Zachary Levi does not appear for the first 35 minutes, and I almost feel like this is one of those movies that, is 20 to 30 minutes too long, and I think it would have functioned a little bit better as closer to 2 hours or perhaps an hour 45. Because when you get these movies that go over 2 hours, because it feels like all of them do at this point, I think you run into some of the dragging issues. And that is especially important for this one. And the first time around, I definitely had an issue with kind of the mom stuff. And I still do to an extent. It just feels like there's so much going on between building up the villain, trying to give him an origin story. Billy Batson is going through these things with his mom and trying to get acceptance from the family. And then you've got this villain plot and you've got the relationship. It just feels like the fundamental issue with story is that it is simultaneously the movie feels too long and it also feels too busy at the same time. And I think when you boil it down, as the movie goes on, I think it gets stronger. I think once we actually see Shazam, I think that's when the movie really starts to pick up. And then you kind of get into the training montage, which is really hilarious. And I think and I'm a sucker for montage, so that was always going to get me. And I think that's where it kind of really starts to build up. And it's funny, the third act of this movie shouldn't work because it's kind of generic. It kind of feels like a lot of other types of these movies. But the fact that they had the whole family involved, there was not a big blue beam in the sky. It wasn't the world that was being threatened. It was just kind of an amusement park or the city of Philadelphia. The stakes felt personal enough to where I think the third act still works. And I enjoyed that monologuing moment. I think that's something that I wish superhero movies would do more often in honor of The Incredibles. So that's kind of where I'm with the story. I think the movie definitely has its slow points. But when I think this movie, once it gets going, I think it really works.
Yeah, I think the strength of the writing is the relationship between Freddie and Billy, and then the build up with the family towards the end. Because I did not see any of that coming, where the whole family turns into superheroes. So that was a cool twist. But then again, the weakness of it is the very poorly put together villain and the origin story. Although it does have that cool scene that I love, that is almost straight out of Dogma with the idolaters and them being judged and getting murdered. Oh my god, great scene, man. But yeah, other than that, I'll go with a 6 because I feel like it does have its strengths, especially with like the family drama stuff, and then like of course that twist at the end. But then again, everything else is kind of poorly put together, and then you got this. It's too long, and then they should have cut some of the beginning out. And I think they should have made maybe a scene or two more with the parents of like the foster parents, and maybe even a scene with the mom, because like it just felt like by the end the mom felt like a total bitch, and I guess she's supposed to be, but at the same time it's like there's always a reason. You can't always just assume that she's a bitch. There's something there. There's like a history there. A young mom, 17, with a kid that age. There's you can't just judge like that. So I kind of felt like they kind of shortchanged her.
I definitely would have preferred the mom scene in a Shazam sequel and get to this point in another way to where they could really kind of develop the mom character a little bit better, because I think she does come off very poorly. I think that they're clearly trying to go for this angle of she was overwhelmed and that's why it wasn't going to work, and you see it. I do appreciate the fact that they changed perspectives on the amusement park scene. We see one version of it at the beginning, and then we see one when we actually see the mom, the older version of the mom. So I think they're trying, but the mom stuff needed to either be more developed, or I think it needed to be put more in the sequel as opposed to this movie. But my score is a 6. I'm in agreement with you. I think there's some positives. I don't think it totally adds up. It's really unfortunate because it really feels like we were one or two steps away from this being Pantheon level, and it really feels like the fact that the villains were not as good and the story being a little bit muddled, it kind of messed up with the other parts of this movie. Because I don't know about you, but my technical score is going to be pretty great.
Yeah, in terms of the tech score, I thought the CGI looked good. The suit looked great. That's the best part of them. I mean, visually, the suit, I mean, it's so realistic, and then they got the plastic thing in the middle. When you touch it, it lights up, and they did it with practical effects, and then, I mean, and especially when they have the different color suits, that I really love, because you know me in colors, man. I love bright, vivid colors in my work, so I love that, appreciate that. The music was good. The music cues were good. Um, my I did have some issues with the lighting a little bit because, for me, nighttime snow movies, that's really hard to shoot. That's probably why I don't like Die Hard 2 a lot. Because a lot of Die Hard 2 is just like outdoors at night in the snow and it's hard to see. But luckily they kind of filmed in some of like the twilight, 4 p.m. kind of hour. Because like that bus scene is not clearly like bright in the daytime. It's like, probably in the afternoon, cold, cloudy. But again, that's what Philly is. So they kind of emphasized Philly as a city and kind of made it feel like Philly. So that was kind of cool. In terms of everything else, I think it's solid. I mean, it definitely feels like your standard MCU affair where it's like very clean and very pristine. It's not like Aquaman where that was like totally next level stuff, but for what it was, the CGI on the demons look good, like we mentioned. And then the little things like Mark Strong's eye glowing, I thought that was a nice little touch. And then I don't know what it is, but something about the way they filmed the house, the family, the foster home, that just felt like everything was just like a normal drama. The way they kind of shot that stuff, and it just felt like a totally comforting kind of setting. You know what I mean? It was weird. It's like you see all this chaotic stuff with Mark Strong, and then all of a sudden the family home is kind of calm. So I thought that was kind of a nice little contrast there. So I'll go with an 8 out of 10.
I'm also giving this an 8 out of 10. I think the CGI looks really good. I think the demons look a lot better than most Marvel creations, and this director has a background with horror, so I think that's one of the reasons that the demon characters probably look better. And I don't know, I think there's something to be said about the way that Warner Brothers does their CGI. I think that a lot of it just looks better. I think about the Detective Pikachu movie, which is not a great movie by any means, but I think the design of that movie, which is also Warner Brothers, I think it looks really good. You look at a movie like Aquaman, that movie looks really spectacular. So I don't know, there's just something about the way that Warner Brothers does things that I think it's just a little bit better, even if this movie doesn't cost as much as some of the Marvel movies. I really appreciated that. And I love the colors, I love the use of the suit. And yeah, I just think that even though this movie is a little bit shaggy at 2 hours and 12 minutes, I am still also going to give the technical score an 8 for the reasons that I mentioned above. And with that in mind, let's go to the legacy. I'm a little bit torn on the legacy here because I feel like this is one of those movies that could gain in popularity. And one of the reasons that I think it could gain in popularity is the fact that it is a Christmas movie. And it did come out in April of last year. I could see this becoming a part of people's Christmas rotations at some point because I think it's really entertaining. I think it's light enough to still be a fun Christmas movie. So I will be very curious. I know that we try to do these legacy things even a year after, but I feel like this is one of those movies that it's not going to have a cult following because I think it was a little too successful for that. But I feel like this is one of those movies that in 5 to 10 years, people are going to look back and say, this was a really good superhero movie at a time when there were just a glut of these movies. And in 2019 in particular, just the month of, just if you look at the first half, you're talking about like 7 superhero movies in those first 6 months. And I think this might actually be the second best one. If you look at it, I think this movie is significantly better than Captain Marvel. It's not even in the same universe as Hellboy and Dark Phoenix. I think it's better than Spider-Man Far From Home. I don't think it's as good as Avengers Endgame, but I think this movie is very, very fun, and I have a hard time coming up with a score, so I'm going to settle on a 7.
I'm going to go with a 7 as well because I was looking at the numbers and it's very difficult for a property like this that's not really as popular as like a Wonder Woman to go out there, perform on their own in a lot of heavy competition. And even like the not the free preview screenings, but the screenings that were like a week before, like they did sneak screenings and like I had to choose because I was either going to watch Us that weekend or this, and then I decided, I was like, okay, I'll watch the official release for Shazam next week, and Us that week. But still, like, even with Us, that made a ton of money in March, so like, there was still like a lot of competition, even that wasn't even like superhero movies. Like Us was a big movie, you know what I mean? And it came out a week before, so a lot of competition. I don't want to say it got lost in the shuffle, like I said, because it did make its fair amount of money, and it made what, 350 worldwide. I mean, I really wasn't expecting that at all. I know people were expecting this to kind of flop maybe, but then I think once they released that trailer around December, that's when the momentum started to pick up and then the buzz started getting going. So I think it's one of those things like Captain America 1 where you make a solid first footing and then build on that. You know, you got to bring the character back and you got to make him more lovable, really more appealing, and then by the second movie, that's going to make a ton of money if you keep it together because if you have the second movie with The Rock, that's it. You're gonna have a big hit. So I think that's the key, and I think that's maybe why they left The Rock out for the sequel to kind of have the people come back just for the sequel to kind of give it that franchise kind of tag. I think that might have been the strategy, but who knows? Still 7 out of 10 because like God, no one really. I didn't expect this to be anything at all. I thought it was like, oh my God, 2 DC movies 4 months apart. Like what is this? You know, and then Aquaman was a hit and it was really good. So I was kind of. Had my expectations higher, and then they delivered 4 months later, so I was really solid with that and happy with that. So I'm looking forward to a sequel, to be honest.
Yeah, I think this is honestly significantly looking forward more to a sequel to this than Aquaman, and I know that there are a lot of people who love Jason Momoa and love Aquaman, and I really like that movie, but there's just something about Shazam that I think connected with me a little bit more. And yeah, I'm not sure what's going to happen with Black Adam. The concern that I have about The Rock just being in the movie is that he tends to overwhelm any movie that he's in, and it becomes about The Rock, not even the character, just The Rock. And I think that is my main concern is how much of The Rock is going to be in it, and if he's going to overshadow Shazam, I would totally rather cast someone else as Black Adam, or not even have the Black Adam character.
We'll see, because I mean, as much as I know we kind of have mixed feelings on Michael Bay, him in Pain and Gain, The Rock in Pain and Gain, he was not overwhelming, I thought. He was good as, like, the B-side character. He didn't take over the movie. You know what I mean? So I think he's capable of that. You just got to keep him in check. And, I mean, God, they've been saying his name for the Black Adam role since 2016, I think, and you got to deliver on that. I think you just have to. Otherwise, it's like, I don't know. Because I feel like when The Rock says something, it happens. Because, like, I think 3 years ago he said he was going to make a Jungle Cruise movie, and I was like, fucking Jungle Cruise? That's just going to be another, Jumanji-type movie. And then what does he do? He goes and makes fucking Jungle Cruise. So, when he gets his mind set on something, I think he's going to do it.
All right, my total score is a 33, and I believe you have the same one, correct?
Yeah, we just got a point or two different on each category, some of the categories, but it still evens out.
So that is a total score of a 66, and congratulations to Shazam. Probably going to be the second highest rated of 2019, because next week, Brian, we'll get to the burning questions in just a second, but I don't think Hellboy and Dark Phoenix are going to get a 66 combined.
No, and I got bad memories of Dark Phoenix, certainly, but I don't know, man. We'll see how I feel about Hellboy. I felt by the end of Hellboy, I kind of enjoyed it more than the first original Hellboy, only because I wasn't as confused at the ending. But then again, who knows? David Harbour, we'll talk about him next week, because it seems like we got the perfect timing on that, especially with the article that came out several weeks ago. So.
Yes, we will be mentioning that article when we talk about Hellboy as well as Dark Phoenix. All right, let's get to the burning questions. What was the darkest scene in this movie, Brian? I think the darkest scene is between the mom and Billy Batson. The fact that she literally rejects him twice, both in the flashback and in the live moment. I mean, that's really, really dark. And not in the same way as the demons, like, eating and killing people. But, I mean, just the heartbreak of that moment. I mean, you can literally see Billy Batson's heart break as in honor of The Simpsons and that joke. So, that, for me, that scene is really, really depressing.
Wow. Yeah, that'll be my number two on the list, but I gotta go with number one, man. My dogma scene where they're just. I couldn't believe that they actually wrote that scene for this movie, in a family movie, and the way they shot it, and especially when you're dealing with, like, windows that are kind of like opaque. I think that's the term that I'm looking for, but kind of like almost see through, but you can barely see through anything. And then the way that they shot it, and the person banging on the window for their dear life. That was straight out of a horror movie. So there you go. That's gonna be my darkest scene, because I did not see that coming, and that was very violent.
All right, question number two. How is Digimon Hansu able to exist in both the DCEU and Marvel at the same time?
I think what it is that his agent is whoever that person is, male, female. They know what they're doing, because they're basically pitching him like this. Listen, this guy has experience. He's got 5 comic book movies under his belt. He'll not be the star of your movie, but he'll elevate a role that seems ridiculous a little bit. You know what I mean? And he definitely helped the wizard role. He's definitely a memorable character in Guardians. So, and then of course him being unrecognizable in Aquaman. Just keep giving him, different roles, and have that be the gimmick where he's going to be in both, even the MCU. Just go back and forth, playing different roles, put him in different makeup, and just have it be this thing where it's almost like a Stan Lee thing, but for actual, an actual side character that doesn't just have one line.
I think he's one of those guys where he's good enough to be in these different roles, but he's never quite been that famous, and I think that's really unfortunate, because it felt like after the movie Amistad, it felt like he was supposed to be a big star, and it never happened. And I'm always concerned that his race had something to do with that, but I'm glad he's getting those DC and Marvel paychecks. I think that's ultimately a good thing. How did we end up with two superhero movies in the first half of 2019, both taking place in Philadelphia?
Well, as we know, Shazam was supposed to come out in Christmas, right? So that kind of made it weird there. But again, with the timing, especially like this was like a year after, I think, Philly won the Super Bowl. So there's all kind of Philly love going on. And yeah, and especially Creed 2 came out this year too. So yeah, just so much Philly love. But it's just weird how, I don't know, Glass also takes place in Philly, but it's so like small scale you can barely tell it's Philly, which I guess is kind of a criticism, but at the same time it's like that's kind of his, the way he likes to portray Philly. But here you see the skyscrapers, you see the big city and everything big about Philly. So I don't know, just timing is everything, I guess. But even so, even if it was released in December, it would have been a month apart that these two movies would have been released anyway. So it's still weird that Philly got all the love.
Yeah, Philadelphia getting love is never a good thing, as somebody who's been there many times. Will this movie become a regular part of your Christmas rotation of movies? I will answer this and say, yeah, I could definitely see that, because I think I noticed the Christmas angle a lot more. I think it's super fun, and it's just a really good watch. And I think there are movies that we have ranked higher, which I would not rewatch as much as this one. I think if I were putting this on a list of rewatchables, this would definitely be in the top 10 or 20, I would say.
Yeah, I think that TNT needs to put this on like repeat every Christmas now and do the Christmas story thing, because you can get this. If you get this like in the public subconscious like that, where like everyone associates the Christmas story with TBS and the 24-hour marathon and TNT and all that, you do the same thing here. That's how you build that audience. You know what I mean? You get the familiarity, and everyone's like, okay, Shazam, Christmas, and everyone starts associating that together. I think that's something you got to start doing, because I know like God, this was like probably like 10 years ago, I want to say. I know FX did like a New Year's Day marathon of Daddy Daycare or something like that, just all day. And all of a sudden, a year later, we got Daddy Daycare 2. So I think there's something to that where you gotta just like incept it in people's minds and make it a Christmas movie. If people don't want to accept it as a Christmas movie, you kind of have to force their hand, maybe rotate that shit on TNT, and then you'll get a built-in audience, and then then it'll become like a regular tradition for a Christmas movie. Mine personally, it's usually Gremlins, maybe Die Hard every couple years. What else? There's probably other things, but for some reason, Gremlins is like my number one. I want to say, but that's just me.
And the final question, what do you want to see out of a Shazam sequel?
I want more character development with the family. I want more character development for the kids, especially some of the kids that didn't get a whole lot of dialogue. You know what I mean? And I want to see The Rock interact with these kids. You know what I mean? Like I think The Rock interacting with kids and trying to be funny, but not, you know what I mean? Like subtle funny and him being tough, but then them being kind of fun and ridiculous because they're kids. I think that dynamic can really work, and I think that's the dynamic they got to work with, and keep them as kids and keep them like naive and stuff. And then you have a naive group of superheroes interacting with this tough badass. I think that creates this interesting dynamic that can work for a sequel, and you kind of explore more of the family. And I want to know more about the parents, man. I felt like they were shortchanged, so.
Yeah, I definitely want to know more about the parents. I think that is one angle I would love to see. I don't necessarily know if I want to see Black Adam. I almost think that if you were to tell me there wasn't going to be a Black Adam in the next movie, I would be okay with that. I think I just want to see more character development, and I don't want to see the problem that so many superhero movies run into with the sequel bloat. I really just want to see a lot of continuation and development of these characters, and I think a movie like Captain America Winter Soldier is a much better model for these sequels than almost any of the other superhero sequels that we've seen over the course of these last few years. And I just want to see something fun and engaging and continuing this franchise. Next week, we will be talking about two more continuations of franchises, one of which is the definitive end, and one of which we probably won't see another Hellboy movie for quite some time. Both of these movies were catastrophic bombs. One or both may go into the pile of shame. We will be talking about Hellboy and Dark Phoenix next week, so definitely make sure you tune in for that. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
Lightning with my hands. Lightning with my hands. Lightning with my hands. Yeah.